Hello, and thank you for joining us to learn about completing Form SF424A in your grant application. My name is Carmen Myers-Reed, and I'm with the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which is part of the U.S. Economic Development Administration. Because this video is hosted by the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, some of the advice given here may only be applicable to our programs. So let's get started by reviewing what we will cover on this video. We will start by talking about what the SF424A is and about some pre-application steps that you will need to take when applying for a grant through grants.gov. Next, we will review the form itself and go over in detail how to complete it. Finally, we will talk about how to think like a reviewer and check for consistency across various budget-related documents. The best advice that we can provide applicants is not to wait until the last minute to submit your application in grants.gov, as there are several pre-application steps that you must take. First, you must obtain an EIN number if you do not already have one. Please note, this can take up to 5 weeks. You will also need to obtain a DUNS number, which generally takes 2 business days. You will need to register for SAM. This can take an additional 2 weeks, and an EIN is required for this registration. Finally, you will create a grants.gov username and password. If your organization is a first-time applicant and/or you are new to the process, please ensure that you take the time to make sure that your authorized organization representative has the credentials necessary to submit the proposal. To reiterate, the EDA strongly recommends submitting in advance of the application deadline, which is strictly enforced. Luckily, you can stay in the loop about upcoming grant opportunities by reviewing the EDA website, identifying relevant notice of funding opportunities, and subscribing to updates on those NOFOs via grants.gov. So let's start by talking about what Form SF424A is. Technically speaking, this form is the budget information form for non-construction programs. It is a required piece of non-construction related grant applications. Finally, it must match references in your budget throughout your application, specifically question 18 of Form 424 and your budget narrative. Now let's get started on the specifics for how you will fill out this form. We will go through each section of the form, and I will provide information regarding what goes in each field. The form is divided into 6 sections, lettered A through F. Section A is a high-level summary for the full budget of your entire project. On this slide, we will talk about columns A and B of this section. You will get the information for these fields from the opportunity listing on grants.gov. Both of these columns will be filled out with the information from the CFDA number listed on grants.gov. The first column will be the catalog program title, which is the number associated with the title associated with the CFDA number. The second column is where you will enter the numeric CFDA number as associated with the grant that you are applying for. Because you will only be applying for one federal grant at a time, you will only complete one row of this section. Continuing here in Section A, you will need to complete columns C and D with estimated unobligated funds. If you're applying for a new grant, you will enter $0 for both of these columns. You will only enter dollar amounts here if you are applying for a grant continuation. Columns E and F are where you will enter your total overall budget for the project. In column E, you will enter the amount of federal funding that you are applying for. And in column F, you will enter your match funds. The total will autofill in column G. The next section that we will talk about today is Section B. This is the breakdown into categories of how the budget for this project will be spent. These are the categories that you will be breaking out your budget into. For personnel, you will include the salaries of all staff that are attached to this project. This should match the staffing plan that you submit with your budget narrative. Fringe benefits include the cost of benefits for the staff that are attached to your project. Travel is a projection of travel costs associated with your projects. Equipment and supplies are similar. though equipment is thought to be a long-term asset that has a unit cost of $5,000 or more. Contractual should be any cost for which you would have a written contract associated, and a construction costs are those costs covering project-related construction. In general, construction costs are not allowable for OIE grants, so please check the NOFO to determine if these sorts of costs would be allowable for the opportunity to which you are applying. The other category should be used only when the cost does not fit into another category. Most costs will fit into one of the categories A through H. Total direct charges will automatically populate in row I. You will then need to fill out your indirect charges if you have them. Please note that you will need to submit a negotiated indirect cost agreement if you have one. Otherwise, you will need to use the federal de minimis rate if such indirect costs are allowable. For program income, you will list any income that is predicted to come from the program directly. Remember, program income cannot be used as matching funds. Section C is where you will list out the sources of your matching funds. You will divide these out by applicant, that is, matching funds that you are bringing to the table on your own as an applicant, state funds, and other sources. For all three of these categories, you will include both cash and in-kind match in the amounts. You must provide a commitment letter for each element of your match, breaking out the specifics, particularly for in-kind contributions. Section D is where you will forecast your cash needs for the first year of your project. You will include both federal in row 13 and non-federal match in row 14. The totals will autofill once you have entered the information for each quarter. Section E is where you will list out the federal funds needed for your project. You will only list the federal share here, not the full budget for your project, unless you are submitting an application without matching funds. You will fill out the sections that apply to your program's length. Make sure that the first year totals match what you have entered in Section D, row 13. For Section F, you will enter the amount of direct and indirect charges, both federal and matching, for your projects. Direct and indirect charges should match the totals in Section B, rows I and J, shown here. So now that we have gone over the basics of how to fill out the form, we will talk about how we review this form as it relates to the rest of your application. There are several areas throughout your application that reference the budget or parts of it. Obviously, Form SF424A references the budget. The budget narrative also needs to match this form and the other areas of the budget mentioned throughout your budget. There is budget information in question 18 of Form SF424A. The staffing plan is part of your budget narrative and needs to match what you have said throughout your application. Finally, your commitment letters need to match the match amounts that you have listed throughout. All of these sections need to match, and you should think about your budget holistically, with these parts fitting together to build a whole. That's it. Thank you for taking the time to go over this process with us. If you have additional questions after watching this video, please visit our website at eda.gov/OIE or email us at oie@eda.gov. Thanks for watching.